Afternoon. Real pleasure to have Grant Beckett and Dr. Patti Fletcher with us today. They're from Workhuman, which helps enterprises connect their culture to shared purpose. I'll let them explain what that means. It'd be great to hear from them about Workhuman, but also the customer heroics they've been seeing, and especially in the leadership arena. So welcome, Grant. Welcome, Dr. Patti Fletcher. Great to see you both.
Great to see you.
Why don't you spend a couple of minutes talking about yourselves and Workhuman, and then we'll jump into the acrobatics.
Sounds good. Great. You want to start?
I am Grant Beckett. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy at Workhuman. Excited to join today. I've spent 30 years, surprisingly so, I did the math a few minutes ago, in the HR software and services arena. And been 11 years at Workhuman. Found this little company called Globoforce that was reinventing the way people connect through recognition. Been with the company and now kind of reinventing more and more ways that people can connect at work. So excited to join the podcast today.
Good to have you.
Thank you.
Patti.
Yeah, so I grew up in enterprise software, started at SAP and helped bring the HR line of business to market starting in the late 90s, pre-Y2K, and really did a lot of work around the business enterprise software space in multiple arenas, but always focused in on the intersection of people, technology, and business. Over the last, I'd say, decade and a half, I've added in a kind of scholar practitioner approach, taking organizational development and looking at it from an unconscious bias or equity in the workplace lens, which has really forced me to start thinking about our businesses in terms of systems, right, and how they work. I started at Workhuman on April 1st of this year, so during the pandemic, which in itself has been really interesting. We'll probably come through some of those observations as we talk about leadership acrobatics. But what's been really interesting, Vinnie, after so many years of focusing in on the kind of software that streamlines processes, that helps your organizations run better from a functional department perspective, is seeing how Workhuman stuff, and we'll be talking about this today, how they're using technology, how they're using data, how we're using AI, machine learning to be able to build on top of those systems, this whole thing around human connection and the actual tangible and intangible benefits that brings to bear when it comes to business impact, competing, and also not just surviving, but thriving during times of crisis. So really happy to be here and have a good conversation with you.
Patti, we met at SAP, so it'll be very interesting to hear what you've been doing since.
Yes.
Grant and Patti, it's in all the doom and gloom. We were talking about what I've been doing in the last few months, but it's just been an amazing time for human creativity, energy.
But as leaders, right, so our job is to give people what they need in order to stay focused and all of that. And what's been really interesting is seeing leaders, like we have customers at Citizens Bank, where the leaders are really understanding that the culture of their organization, something that every CEO has stood on a stage for gosh knows how many years to talk about how culture eats strategy for business. But the truth is, this is the testing grounds. When I see someone like a Citizens Bank, an executive from there, talking about how to keep our employees focused, right? Everything's been shut down, to help them be able to pivot. My goodness, these are our bank employees that are doing things like working over hours to fill sanitizer bottles, how they're seeing the importance of a resilient culture, one that is all about the connection of their people based on who they are, the values of their organization, what they're trying to achieve. And the day before the pandemic started, it was all about serving the community with banking services. After, it was so much more than that. It became part of, how are we part of the glue in the community? And therefore, how do we be able to leverage our culture of connectedness to be able to create that glue? So the CEO reaching out, thanking every single employee for what they're doing, and then employees being given by these leaders the ability to do the same for each other, right? We know that in the workplace, your peer relationships are part of the glue that keeps you there. So it's been amazing to see leaders step up and realize people need more than Zoom, which is super helpful, right? We need more than those typical productivity kind of tools working from home. We actually need tools that help us connect with each other in a way that connects us to who we are as a business. Because when it comes to like citizens, how the reason people are receiving recognition from each other, recognition from their CEO, is not just because of the heroics that they're doing for their communities, but how they're doing them. It's all aligned with the values of the business and the mission.
Is that, as Patti was just talking, I was just thinking about it. There's really two ways that leaders are leaning into this topic about connectedness in the workforce, and really, as you mentioned, in the doom and gloom days, really focusing on the humanity. There's one is just a top-down thank you blast out to everybody in the company, one of our largest clients, a consumer packaged goods company that's really on the front lines of sanitation and whatnot. From the top, from the CEO, a blast out worldwide to all the employees, hundreds of thousands of employees, to say thank you, to recognize the work that's being done, and to really kind of build that into the culture. But most of the leaders are also realizing that they can't be everywhere, especially on Zoom. They're not connecting. They're not in the meeting, in the office, walking around, seeing everybody. So they're really leaning into, maybe what you might call crowdsourcing of positivity in the workforce, and not just allowing, but expecting every employee to be a steward of the culture.
You guys have mentioned the bank. You mentioned a CPG company. In all the research you've done, have you seen certain industries step up more than others? Clearly healthcare would come up, right? But across the board, have you seen certain companies, certain industries step up a little bit more? And why would you say they have?
So Patti, why don't I start off with kind of our focus or the success we've had with very large pharmaceutical organizations. We're actually proud to say that 4 of the 5 pharma companies that are in trial for a vaccine are our customers. It's the J&Js of the world, the Merck, the AstraZeneca, the Modernas. That industry specifically is really focused on these connections at work, right? And making the whole culture come to life, because they're on the front lines, literally on the front lines. Maybe I think Patti's going to tell a story of frontline health workers, but these folks are on the front lines of innovation to help the world in solving this. And so that's been a big focus, helping those organizations lean into everything we just described. I'd say in general, what we do and help companies do is really works across all industries. Some of our clients' industries, such as in the retail and hospitality industries, have really been significantly hurt from it. So they've had to maybe back off of some of this, which is too bad to some extent from the financial point of view. They've had to do it, but those are probably the organizations that probably need the most at this point in time of bringing that together.
That's a big pressure. What other changes have you noticed there?
Well, so it's very interesting because the way that people communicate through our product is very organic and authentic, right? These aren't prescribed transactions that an HR company is telling people to do. These are in the moment, as people are working together and describing how grateful they are to work together, business results they're delivering, and they're using very specific vocabulary, right? These are, paragraphs and paragraphs of gratitude. They're just not pat on the backs. These are kind of gratitude moments. We have the ability to use natural language processing to actually understand how the vocabulary has changed pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? Now, a lot of it is about the teamwork, the positivity, the staying, in the moment and satisfying maybe that lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy of just safety and connections, because this world has changed and the intensity has gotten so great, and the resilience of the workforce is probably the most important thing to really that these moments are really focusing on and boosting each other.
From a healthcare perspective, we have this incredible customer base, State Health. They're located in Massachusetts with Grant and IR. They're a smaller kind of set of community hospitals, about 10,000 doctors, nurses, and support staff, and they serve some of our state's most vulnerable populations, underserved populations. And they're amazing. For 4 years in a row, and I apologize, it was in my head right before the podcast and on the tip of my tongue now, but there's a National Association of Nurses in the US, and I think it's the most prominent one. And Bay State, for the 4th year in a row, has won their Excellence Award for nursing, and that makes them part of only 1% of the population of hospitals have achieved that. And what we've seen with them is they are doubling down. They already had an amazing nurses program, but in talking with them, and their CHRO was just in our big event that we had a few weeks ago, Workhuman Live Online. But in talking with their CHRO, the story she is telling me, and the head nurse, around how we're doubling down on our nurses, you have to understand, Patti, these are the people who are becoming family members, right, for the patients. We understand and know that they too have families, that they need support, that they need to know that we see you, right? Just like UCS, we see you, and you are doing a great job in really reinforcing that kind of behavior. Because here's the deal. What they recognize, these leaders, and talk about leadership acrobatics, Vinnie, you know, Grant mentioned Maslow's hierarchy. They understand that their nurses have fear. They're in despair. My God, they have this thing called Code Rocky. They play the Rocky theme every time a patient leaves who had COVID. Well, they showed one for one of their nurses who had COVID. She was treated there and she left. So here we are as nursing staff, as doctors, as you know, support staff in a hospital. Not only are we becoming family members to these strangers who we end up loving, and some leave the way we want them to leave and some don't, but we're also treating each other. That's fear, that's despair. And when you are at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy and you're just worried for the basic safety of yourself and for your family, who you may and may not be seeing a lot during this time, you need something more than your paycheck. You need something more than a program or snacks, right? Which we probably don't even have any, you know, at this time. You need to be able to feel seen. You need that reinforcement about, we know what it is like. We see you. You are doing a great job. We are here for you. This is hard, right? We're not trying to make it easy. You know, we can't change what's happening, but we can at least see you. And those are the kinds of things that have really just had exceptional impact.
Things that when Bay State launched with us a few years ago, one of the first recognition moments, when the first time somebody took the moment to see somebody else and say something, was actually a very senior doctor. And he said it to a gardener. And he said, I've been wondering who you were for so long. I'd walked in for the past 2 years, seeing how amazing you kept the grounds. And I just want to tell you, now that I have an outlet to do it, how important that is that I believe to our patients. You may not even notice it. You know, you might think the doctors are the ones that actually save people, you know, but the environment that you create for our patients makes the difference. And so it's that muscle memory of actually seeing each other, taking the time, and really telling what the impact is for their business and the constituents.
I mean, that's so nice to hear at the human level. You know, that those compliments are so important. That's, you talk about beyond COVID, right? So Mark Benioff of Salesforce has said, is this a pandemic or an epidemic? He said, you know, it started off as a health crisis, became a financial crisis, then it became a diversity crisis, at least in the US. Now it's becoming a climate change crisis, right? So it's been one after another. I don't think any MBA school, certainly nobody taught me about leading through one crisis, not 4 in a row. What have you guys learned, you know, given this string of crises?
What we've been doing, climate change, DEI, all of these things we've been doing, the 24/7 work hours, they might be what got us here in the first place. We haven't paid attention to the fact that we haven't updated our work systems in well over 100 years. They were built for someone else to work in a very different way. So I agree with him. I think it's an and. I think we are facing an epidemic around a pandemic. I think we are starting to realize, oh no, right? Like we lived through this. There is always going to be times of uncertainty. The pace of that uncertainty just feels bigger because everything's important. But what I'm also seeing is this power shift. We're seeing, and we've seen it, even before the pandemic, we've seen the Me Too movements. Black Lives Matter certainly became more prominent now, which, by the way, is also part of the leadership acrobatics. The workplace has become kind of the refuge to discuss those kinds of topics. And for the first time ever over the last few years, it has become the place to actually talk about them with heads of HR, with leaders, because it's become a safe place. But this power shift, Vinnie, is really been interesting to watch, because what we know, particularly in the world that we're in now, this fourth industrial revolution where people relationships matter more than ever, is that leaders are only leaders if followers enable them to be. So the shift is really around, what can I as a leader do to enable you to be able to do the best work of your lives? It's going to take a very long time to be able to achieve that, because that's a very different paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift in how we reward people, what success looks like. Is it performance driven? Is it putting time in driven? We really have to start questioning all these status quos, the way work is designed, the workplace is designed, who gets promoted, gig economy, all of those things.
How do you do
worse till it gets better?
How do you do remote mentoring? How do you do remote training? I mean, it's a whole new world.
Yeah, and I think what we talk about is three simple things: thank, talk, and celebrate. So as a leader, thinking about just finding ways to thank people, finding ways to talk, right? Just the simple word of just talk, connect. And what we've seen actually during the pandemic, and I believe this will continue on, is that part of our product is a continuous performance development solution where people can give feedback, set check-ins, do agile goals. We've talked a lot about recognition on the most positive side of feedback, but even this idea of just check-ins spiked in our product, where managers and employees are just finding an opportunity just to have an eye-to-eye contact, whether you've over Zoom, and just to do a check-in or just to ask for a little bit of feedback. And I do believe, again, hopefully as we move forward through the pandemic, that hopefully we may build up some muscle memory around that. So as we return, whether it's back to the workplace, where it's half back to the workplace and half still back on Zoom, that we find a way to make those connections a lasting habit. So I think that habit building as a leader of getting in the just checking in phase is important.
Right. One of the executives I interviewed said, after a shock, the bungee usually snaps back. And he says, usually we go back to 80% of where we were before. He said, I hope this time we only go back 50%. To your point, I hope we've learned a few things that we carry forward and not just go back to the old ways. Patti, I've got to ask you, it's been a couple of years since you wrote the book Disruptors that I reviewed. Great book.
Thank you.
How has COVID and all the related crises impacted women? What have you seen, both from a leadership and maybe from a negative impact on women in the workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, the last sentence on the last question is it, and that's going backwards. I read, it could have been McKinsey or World Economic Forum, but essentially all the work, all the good stuff that's happened over the last 6 years with this topic coming up to the top, the topic around equity in the workplace, whether it's pay or promotion or all of those things. Unfortunately, COVID has set us back so much so that we may end up erasing all of that progress.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So since the COVID has started, women have added on.
Is that because maybe ethnicities become more important in the last few months? Or why would you say it's affected the sexual differences that much?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So absolutely, the intersectionality component is a super, super important part of this topic. So overall, kind of the all women level, women on average are doing 15 hours more work at home, domestic kind of work than they were before COVID. So they're on top of that, right? 15 hours. And I can personally attest to that. As a result, compared to before the pandemic, so it was like March or February, women now, 1 in 4 women now are considering leaving the workplace because of COVID. Yeah. And that is twice.
Because they're having to teach kids at home, do a lot more at home.
All of a sudden we have to choose again. And that's really ultimately what it comes down to, Vinnie. That's the difference. We now are back to shoot. Do we choose between my career, my work, or my family? So we as leaders have got to pay attention. Why are we having this as the choice? Why are we doing this again? When the truth is kind of the hope, some of the early data I saw when this first happened were like, yay, finally work from home. And then the reality of, yes, but then there's all the other stuff we still have to take care of. And it's been adding on. It's not as if our kids and everyone else is, if we have kids at home, are being, taken care of somewhere else. So there's absolutely that. The other thing though is that broken rung, and we might have talked about this before. The broken rung is basically there's this bit of the ladder that's missing for women when it comes to promotion. And so now during COVID, what we're seeing, those promotions are actually getting a bit worse. So for every 100 men who are promoted, it's gone from like 89 or 90% would be women down to 85. So for every 100, there's now 85 women getting promoted. And so we can't not start to question, wait a minute, does that mean we as leaders have that unconscious thing coming back into our brains going, she can't possibly, help her kid with her homework and do a conference call, right? Like it's absolutely crazy. On the other part, you had talked about the intersectionality. Women of color are 6 times more likely to leave, right? So comparing to the average for white women, 4 times. Why? Because of how women make decisions. They are relational in their decision making. If I close the country down, if I do, the mask only, if I keep the country open but have strict rules around what you can do, how would it impact the disease, the spread of the disease, these constituents? So I really do hope that we as leaders in the private sector are looking at those leaders in the public sector who are women and the impact they've been able to have. Because the challenge, going back to that wrong.
I was hoping for all positives, but that is sobering. But thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it's important to recognize it. Let's switch gears a little bit. You deal with, obviously, HR all the time. We're dealing with some companies reopening workplaces in a very different format, right? A lot of protocols. Every league has gone back to playing. Thank God. They're providing us some path forward, and they've been reasonably successful with it, right? The NBA didn't have a single COVID in their bubble. Others have done, but they're pushing forward. We've got to learn to live with this, right? What are you finding? What are you hearing about the future of the workplace?
For one, what we're hearing, Vinnie, is the future of work has already started. So that's the first thing. And what's been really interesting.
I like to say it's the present of work.
That's right, the present of work, exactly. So before COVID and in previous lives, I used to show this when I talk about the future of work and machinization and all that stuff. I had this slide, and depending on who I talked to, I had a thing under it, right? So it was a robot. And depending on who I would talk to, it was future employee of the month with a question mark or your future boss with a question mark. And what I'm seeing now is we're going to maybe less about the robotics of replacing human beings, but instead a focus on workplace design as machines help us to connect more with each other. What I'm seeing, and granted, I'd be interested to hear what you're seeing, because we're in the same rooms a lot and in different rooms a lot, is I am seeing an acknowledgement that we do have to design what we believe to be good work in a different way, right? So how can we have a hybrid kind of approach more so than before? We're seeing it especially over in the West Coast, which I'm sure is quite great from a real estate perspective because it's so expensive, but it's so much more than that. So how do we keep people connected, knowing that some folks are just going to work from home because quite frankly, they don't need to be here? Then the focus then becomes, so how do we use the technology to keep people connected? Isn't that amazing? Because Vinnie, you and I and Grant, to you as part of some of your previous work, have all been about the efficiency and effectiveness of processes, right? Using that data to make these incredibly awesome decisions that really didn't talk to the humanity or culture. I think we believed they influenced, but they actually didn't do anything about it. So that's really what I'm seeing is a big shift, is when we're talking about the digitalization of HR, it's going beyond the chat pods, conversational HR, visualization in a streamlined process. But instead, how can this technology help us be connected, help us be resilient, help us actually live that employer brand, which is what we compete on as we're out in the market?
Well, and I think this COVID situation has taught us some things. From my perspective, even my personal life, my team and working cross-functionally, I kind of feel like the last 6 months we've been almost hyper productive but only because we'd already built up connections to each other. It's okay to jump on a Zoom meeting and just go right into work, and then finish after an hour and go right into the next work. And you kind of feel okay about that because you know the people you're working with. But I kind of feel like we're at that stage now where the humanity's gone, the productivity's gone up, but people are missing those connections. I find myself, maybe frustrating some of my own colleagues because I'll divert into some personal topics, maybe not about the election today, but other topics just to try to bring some more life to it versus the productivity. So I just think I think we're at that our company's been successful, I personally believe, partly because we have such a strong culture of connectivity. We use our own product and whatnot. But I think we're at that edge of those connections are being worn out. They're not being reinforced over, and kind of re-strengthened. So I think as we return to work, now you've got to think about, okay, maybe some of the people are still on Zoom. Some people are in the office. It's almost like the hybrid schools that my kids are going through, right? Some are sitting in classrooms, some are sitting on Zoom. How does that interconnection work and those relations get built up? So, I mean, I do think the focus on relationships and connections, obviously we use that word a lot today, I think is going to be super important as we return to work in whatever physical, digital spaces we're in.
A couple of things. I've heard so many different HR executive experiences. Makes me really proud because, as I said, HR has for a long time screamed about how do we become strategic. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not strategic yet, but they've certainly become essential, right? That's a huge step forward. But I heard from a warehouse automation vendor, which really made me happy in a way, because he said, we lost a deal because HR nixed our proposal because they said you'll replace warehouse employees. That's not. And HR was like, we don't want that, right? The same HR people came back to them and said, we can see a use case where your robots help our workers distance. So come back and talk to us again.
Wow.
And I thought that was a great for HR to step up and
look
at the world differently rather than just what they've had in a matter of a few months. It's just remarkable. So I'm hearing.
I gotta say, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's really an important difference between, right? So HR, having been in the HR world, Grant, like you for, a few decades now, it's always been about that seat at the table. And what you just talked about, Vinnie, is such a game changer. Before, it's compliance. I represent the company, right? This is what I do as HR. I worry about risk and I make sure that we're following the rules and compliance. And by the way, those are all still important. Your people still have to get paid. You still have to follow legal. You do still have to protect the entity, right? Those are still important. But then there's this shift, the HR plus kind of thing, the real kind of human piece around, okay, great. So now that we have those basic, again, bottom Maslow's hierarchy needs from an organizational perspective, or yes, you're going to get paid and get benefits. Now let's talk about what are the technologies, what are the different things we can use to ensure not just workplace safety, but things like equity, things like you have what you need in order to be successful, things like we're paying attention. That's a totally different shift. That is the business of people versus old school HR. Really, really interesting. And then just one more thing that I thought was pretty sweet. Like I mentioned, we had Workhuman on Live Online a few weeks ago. And one of the speakers we had was this woman, Claude Silver. She runs essentially the HR organization for Vayner Media. Gary Vaynerchuk's very famous marketer. That's his marketing org. Her title, Vinnie, is Chief Heart Officer. Isn't that great? Because they understand they're in the business of people. Whether you're a customer, you're a partner, quite frankly, you're a competitor, or you're an employee, you have a heart, and that's what connects us. So when I hear a story like that, that's what gets you to the table, because that is strategy setting, not just enabling. I love that story.
Great. Any final thoughts?
I think you started off with the comment that in the doom and gloom era we're in right now, or last couple months, you know, the humanity that's been brought out, the stories, you know, the applauding, the courageous work. It's just, you know, in our line of business, as Patti was talking about, as you know, as the people business, it's gratifying to see humanity step up.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I've done so many of these, and I look forward to doing them because most business executives are stressed, but they're positive, they're outcome focused, right? And then I go listen to media and social media, and it's, my God, it's like so negative and so critical. So Patti and Grant, keep doing what you're doing, stay positive, stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinnie. This has been phenomenal, and I'm with you. I'm all for the hope. So right on.
Bye, Vinnie.
Thank you for having us.